Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we wrap up our three-part trilogy on Arrow.
Dun 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 dun. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
So yeah, this will be our third and final, well, for now, until we inevitably do season 7 and 8 in a later episode down the line, of our Arrow trilogy. So this episode we're going to be talking about season 5 and season 6. We'd definitely recommend listening to the previous two episodes before you listen to this one, just generally because we've been setting up a lot of foundation of characters and such that we're going to be talking about in this episode and so on. So it's really good to have that context. It's like the same way you wouldn't start a television show 5 seasons in. It's just a bad way to go about it. So, all right.
Obviously, you watch season 1 and 2, then half of season 3, then season 5, and then half of season 6, and then 7 and 8.
And then you set. Yeah. Well, we assume
that's the general way to watch these shows, right?
yeah, that's the way it goes, obviously. Every show should be watched that way. All right. So moving into season 5 first. So season 5 continues on from season 4, when after Damien Darhk has finally been defeated, Arrow and Oliver Queen tries to get back to his roots and finally become the Green Arrow until he has to contend with a threat from his past in the form of Prometheus.
All whilst dealing with being mayor.
Yes, also the mayor thing. That's fairly important for this season as well. So, but also Prometheus. Prometheus is the thing I want to talk about. But before we get into that, because there's a lot of very interesting things to talk about regarding the villain for this season. What do we think of season 5? Continuing on from season 4.
Season 5 was a nice return to its roots.
Yep.
I feel it generally gets a lot of praise, which it does deserve for being one of probably the second best season aside from season 2.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I do think it does probably has its flaws, and some of this appreciation is probably more in comparison to what's been around it.
It feels better compared to season 4. It's like a contrasting thing, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it is still a fantastic season full of twists, turns, and a really, really interesting villain for once.
Yes. Very entertaining villain, of which the likes we have not seen since season 2. So, obviously Damien Darhk has his merits in that he's entertaining to watch, but he's not a particularly well-constructed villain. Where this Prometheus kind of has all the things that Slade Wilson initially had, in that he has a really strong emotional connection to Oliver Queen, and he's physically intimidating, and he's just really, really watchable as well, the actor. So,
and it feels like it's been building. It's not just like an isolated season. It feels like it draws on everything from the past 4 years.
Yeah, sure. Like, as you sort of mentioned, it feels like it's returning back to its roots, because so much of what happens in this season explicitly references stuff and arcs that happened in season 1 and 2. So yeah, I mean, to go into my brief thoughts, generally speaking, I feel kind of the same, and that it's leagues better than season 4. I think you're absolutely right when you point on the fact that it gets probably more praise than it deserves, purely because it came after season 4, but I still think there are good things in this season, even if it's not. It's still no season 2 in many ways. Yeah, so, and we'll obviously get into that, but generally speaking, much more improved.
Yes, and what's great about it usually tends to mask some of the more crappier parts of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of, it's going to make for an interesting season to talk about. So yeah. So moving into the details itself at the very least, is there anything you want to talk about regarding Oliver Queen and his arc that he is currently going on leading into this season?
Well, this season's interesting because it's the final of the flashbacks. So it's finally now we find out how Oliver probably got off the island and became the Hood, in the sense that it's his arc is completed across the 5 years on the island.
Which was the original plan of the show, right?
Yes.
As we mentioned in previous episodes.
Yes. And of course, he spends most of it in Russia. So,
well, yes.
But that's fine, because I found that a bit better than with the whole Hong Kong situation, because at least then it's still leading back to a lot of things from season 1 with his dealings with the Bratva, and bringing in from season 2 the character of
Anatoly?
Yes, Anatoly.
Yes. KG Beast.
Yes.
Yes, which we will get into talking to more explicitly,
So yeah, linking back to Anatoly, also known as KG Beast, and dealing with all that. So I feel, at least with him being off the island, it still makes more sense than some of the stuff in season 3. Although he still... Turns out his hair is a wig. I still don't quite get that.
Yeah.
And still no goatee, which I was promised would be the end of the season 5.
I mean, he's perpetually had like a little bit of stubble at the very least. But yeah.
But this was meant to be his like Superman getting his cape at the end of Smallville. This was meant to be he finally grows out his goatee.
Is Oliver Queen... Is the cape from Superman really comparable to Green Arrow's goatee? Like, surely it's more like...
Yeah, the Superman's cape is not as not as well known.
Not as iconic.
Not as iconic. I mean...
Yeah. I don't know. To be honest, like, obviously I'm not a bigger Green Arrow fan, but it's just one of those things that makes him, like... You're not even being subtle about how close he is to, like, Robin Hood. You want to make him look just like Robin Hood, and that's exactly what the goatee does.
Yeah.
So...
I mean, I'm looking at, like... I was up there when they brought in the New 52, and they shaved off the goatee, and the uproar that caused.
Sure. Although granted, very different audience to the show.
Yes.
As we've talked about before, but yeah. Interesting. So, this is the official season. This is the first time he's officially getting called Green Arrow as well.
Yeah. Well, he was sort of being called it in season 4, but...
But not directly, isn't it? Like, I'm trying to remember exactly.
He announces himself in season 4 as the Green Arrow.
Yeah, sure. I'm getting that mixed up. I thought that happened in season 5.
However, this is when he was actually meant to become the Green Arrow in terms of the original plan of the...
Maybe that's how I'm getting mixed up. So yeah. Yep.
And it is sort of, especially with season 4 being how it is, there wasn't a whole lot to deal with the public because it was all very secretive. It was all the ghosts and the subterfuge and the arc and everything, but he didn't actually get to deal with the public of Star City anyway. So in terms of the city, it's probably the first time they're properly getting introduced to the Green Arrow.
Sure. The Green Arrow kind of becomes a public figure in season 5 in a way that Oliver Queen does as well. Segue. So Oliver Queen is mayor. Is that like referenced anything from the comics or anything like that? Because that was a new one to me going into this show. That was a direction I did not expect them to take with Oliver Queen.
No, it's not. There may have been some references back in the day. It's not something that I've stumbled across.
Right, okay.
It's more tapping into the fact that in the comics, Oliver Queen is that public sort of figure and very outspoken in terms of politics.
Sure, but he's never actually gotten into politics.
No.
Okay, interesting. I wasn't sure if that was a line that he ever crossed, because as you mentioned, like, he's obviously very about politics. As we kind of talked about in the first episode, that he's kind of considered like a leftist superhero for the people.
He is the literal definition of a social justice warrior.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. A social justice bowman? Yeah? Something
social
like that?
Social justice archer.
Yeah. So, okay. So in the very least, like, his tone as mayor makes sense for the character, even if it isn't directly referencing anything from the comics. Okay, cool. That was something I was wondering about, to be honest. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding Oliver Queen this season? Or...
Well, I do want to talk a lot about Oliver Queen, but I might save that till once we've finished also talk about season 6, because there's a lot we have to draw on in terms of Oliver Queen. We haven't touched on him yet because it is all that sort of build up.
Okay,
so.
Sure. Fair enough. All right, we'll save that for season 6 at the very least.
Yes.
So moving on from there, like, one of the more significant parts of season 5 in that Oliver trying to go back to his roots is that he tries to rejuvenate like a new form of Team Arrow, which is where a lot of the new supporting characters come in from, obviously. So there was... I'm trying to remember all of them off the top of my head.
We have Mr. Terrific.
That's the one.
Wild Dog.
Ragman to begin with.
Artemis.
Yes.
And later on in the season, the new Black Canary.
Yes, that's right. So what do we generally think about all these new additions to the show? Because to be honest, they always kind of struck me as them, and like the training of the new Team Arrow always kind of struck me as the weakest part of the season, if I'm being honest.
I can tend to agree with you on that. I feel they also... It got complicated, especially with Artemis and her story arc,
Yeah.
and Ragman just leaving.
Yeah.
And-
I've always wondered about... So basically, for people who don't remember, like Ragman basically finds out Felicity was the one who bombed his town
Yeah.
and says, hey, I'm out of here. I always wondered, was that like a narrative reason, or were they literally juggling too many characters and had to get rid of someone? Because that's what kind of a lot of this stuff feels like with the Team Arrow, that they're juggling so many different storylines and trying to service so many different people that things just get lost in the shuffle.
I haven't seen anything officially released from Word of God as to what the whole deal with Ragman was.
Okay.
For me, as a viewer, it did kind of feel like they were just trying to wrap up that whole Haven Rock arc.
Wrap up that man, because he's Ragman and he's rapping. Yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yes. It felt like, because they did get a lot of backlash for just, oh, we've blown up town, let's move on very quickly. And there was no, like...
Yeah, they were trying to
real
give Felicity
fallout
some
for that.
sort of retribution. But
Yeah.
even that, I don't think succeeded as well.
It was basically just, yeah, no, I'm cool with that. You did what you had to, I'm out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that had anything to do with if the actor was choosing to leave, or if that was just because they were dealing with too many characters and stuff. It just felt... I feel he was probably the weakest of the new Team Arrow.
Well, yeah, sure. He was definitely the least developed, especially at that point, which obviously was not helped by the fact that he left super early on
No.
as well. So, yeah, I don't know. Can you speak to, like, generally speaking, like the relationship between a lot of these characters in Green Arrow in the comics, or?
There is not a whole lot of relationship. In terms of the superhero codenames, Green Arrow has dealt a bit with the Wild Dog Militia, because in the comics it's quite different. There are a few Wild Dogs, and they sort of vary from villain to hero and back to villain, and there's sort of an extremist group that he has to deal with. In Rebirth recently, they've had the return of the Wild Dog Militia, where it's just a bunch of almost right-wing nuts sort of trying to attack a Native American.
An alt-right group, basically, or does make sense for a lot
Never
of point.
explicitly stated, but leaning on from sort of center to right.
Yeah, okay. It's
in
within
terms
that
of political,
ballpark at the very
yeah.
least, politically. Yeah.
And very much just sort of extremists.
Yeah, sure. I just find that interesting, considering the position that he takes in the show itself. So, like Arrow every now and then has done, for lack of a better word, like a message episode, when they kind of wrap an episode around a specific topic. And one of the ones they did was gun control, and that character was basically the one that outright said, "No, we want guns," which is obviously an inherently right, almost not alt-right position, but a rightist position to take, which I just think was interesting. So. Yeah.
Very conservative in terms of keep government away from our
Yeah,
sections.
yeah,
Yes.
of course.
That was sort of the link with Green Arrow and Wild Dog. Artemis, we know, for those who have seen Young Justice, will know that that's basically where she came from, the whole idea of Artemis, and really not seen too much in the comics.
Yeah,
So a lot
she
of that
she was an original creation for Young Justice, wasn't
Yeah.
she? From what I can recall. Yeah, right. Okay.
So yeah, and they've sort of taken on the codename from that, although again the character is very different because they've just taken a one-off character from season 4 and just given her that codename and taught her how to use a bow.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So that's probably the closest link you'll have out of the entire team, because Ragman, not a lot of time with Green Arrow, Mr. Terrific, aside from their work together in the Justice League, not a whole lot to go on. Yeah, and
Mr. Terrific is generally the most prominent character. Oh, like of the group that ends up joining her, and like Mr. Terrific is the most like significant character of those.
Oh,
Have I got that correct? Yeah. Okay.
yeah, in terms of both the show and the comics.
Yeah.
yes.
Sure. That's what I'm thinking. Yep.
Yeah, because he is in the comics he's a proper member of the Justice League, and he is like one of the smartest people in the world in their universe.
He's one of those scientist type guys, basically.
Yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also incredible athlete and like multiple time gold medalist at the Olympics.
Hence the name Mr. Terrific. So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Which isn't really a thing that comes into the show at all in many respects.
They mention it, but they don't. It's a lot harder to actually show
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and even the character itself was never really leaning into the physicality in many respects.
No.
Like, he's almost played up, especially when he was introduced in season 4, as kind of like just the hyper nerd figure, basically, which is more interested in sitting in front of a computer than doing push-ups. So, yeah, and that character kind of continues at very least in here, which I thought was an interesting diversion for the character. But I think it did make sense more so for this season for Oliver to, like, obviously try and train him up, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have to like, you know, struggle to integrate someone in Teen Arrow if that guy is already like a hyper athlete, if he's already as
Yeah.
talented as Oliver Queen. So that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So
No. And he's also one of the characters that they brought in previously as just an employee of Felicity Smoke. So it makes sense to focus all more on the tech side of things
yeah, sure.
and keep that storyline going rather than trying to introduce a completely different character from ground up who is all these things.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just one of those things. Like, yeah, which I think makes it interesting that so much of the new Team Arrow group is essentially original, because it means that, as we've kind of talked about before, they're not inherently shackled for one character to go another way and such. Like, as we sort of mentioned with Artemis, that whole relationship with Prometheus, that she's an inside source and so on, is completely new and obviously going to be unpredictable to comic fans, which is great. But I think what I struggle with in that respect is that I just think the direction they took a lot of those characters just isn't incredibly interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. Later on, as we get into season 6, I do think they did improve, especially in terms of Wild Dog. He actually became a fleshed out character eventually.
Sure, eventually. I found him really grating in early seasons, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, and also on top of that, the relationship between Ramirez, Wild Dog, Mr. Terrific, and the latest incarnation of Black Canary, that sort of built up a bit, and I could sort of get behind that. But up in season 5, of course, where they're trying to set this up, I feel it's a bit too weak. Took too long for them to actually click.
So it eventually goes in a good direction. It's just this kind of the groundwork they set up isn't particularly effective. Yeah.
I feel, yeah. But then you get into the problems with season 6 as well, so I'll save that for later.
Yeah, we'll get to there eventually. But yeah, I think that's kind of an important part, because those are obviously the most significant additions to season 5 regarding supporting characters and things like that. So is there anything else you want to briefly touch on regarding the characters, or can I finally get into all the villains that I want to talk about very desperately?
I think I'll leave it to you, because you have got the biggest grin on your face.
Yes, I really like Prometheus. I think he's very fun. So, but before I do delve into Prometheus, who's obviously the main antagonist of this season, just to kind of briefly touch on some of the other like minor antagonists, like the first main villain, which they take on at the beginning of the season, Tobias Church, is a completely new character. I kind of wondered if he was influenced by another crime boss in the comics called Tobias Whale, who's an albino guy, but he's almost always been affiliated with Black Lightning. As far as I can tell, he hasn't had much to do with Green Arrow, and it's really only like Tobias is really the only similarity they share. So I thought that was probably worth mentioning. Anatoly, as we mentioned before.
Yes.
So Anatoly in the comics is interesting because he's a character called KG Beast, which is actually kind of a comparable character to Deadshot in many ways. And then he's basically hired for gun. He's basically a gun for hire assassin. Who's, obviously from Russia and has worked with the KGB, hence the really stupid pun name KGB.
Yeah.
As fun as that is, also very stupid. Yeah, actually in the comics, KGB tended to tangle with Batman more than Green Arrow. Surprise, surprise. Once again, Arrow stealing from Batman's canon. We shouldn't be surprised by that at this point, I guess. He's never really been a boss or leader of the Russian group as well. He's almost always just been either a lone wolf or like being forced to work with other people and say Suicide Squad and such. I think in New 52 he was a member of the Suicide Squad, which is interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, so but obviously he has no real connection to Suicide Squad in the show.
He also has a couple of instances with the Sinister Six, but that's another deal with villains in a team role that he's forced into. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. So really the only similarities, like besides the fact that Anatoly's codename was KG Beast, the only similarities he has is basically they're both Russian and they have the same name.
Yeah.
Which kind of feels like stereotyping, to be honest. It's like, oh, we have a Russian character, let's just name him after the one Russian comic book villain we have. So, yeah. But I mean, at the same time, KG Beast has always been a minor player in the comics anyway. Like, even though I love Batman and such, I would consider him like maybe a C-list or D-list antagonist on Batman's Rogues Gallery. Although, granted, he has tangled with other characters before, but he's generally affiliated with Batman. So yeah, that's just, once again, it's one of those lip service things we've sort of talked about before regarding Count Vertigo and things like that, where it's taking the name, there's nothing else much more beyond that. I think Anatoly is a good character, generally speaking, beyond that as well.
Oh, absolutely. I found a lot of the time he was great. A couple of times he got shackled with some bad storylines.
True.
But definitely made it work.
Yeah, no, I think he's fun. I think he has a good dynamic with Oliver Queen and the kind of like reluctant ally / antagonist, I think, is a really fun line that they're perpetually playing, because obviously Anatoly has shown up in previous seasons as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've always enjoyed the dynamic he has with Oliver Queen. And even though I generally haven't cared about the flashbacks from season 3 onwards, I kind of like that we got a little bit more of him sprinkled into season 5 and how that tied into how he's been in the rest of the show. So I think that kind of works. Yeah. Other character we should briefly touch on before as well is Black Siren. If we're going to be talking about source material. So Black Siren, the only reference this is a really weird thing, because I always thought Black Siren was based on a character from the comics, but the only reference I could find to a character called Black Siren, funnily enough, was a character from the DCAU, so in the animated universe, and regarding like Justice League Unlimited, Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond, and so on and so forth, when she was a member of the Justice Guild, which was seen in a flashback episode of the Justice League, similar to the Justice Society, kind of, if you think of like Legends of Tomorrow and something like that. But all that basically happens was that she was a crime fighter, and she was killed during a missile attack in Seaboard City. And as far as I can tell, the only similarity she has is with name. So, which basically means Black Siren is a completely original character. And kind of a nice one, I think, to be honest. See, this is a weird thing. I've kind of crapped on Katie Cassidy in previous episodes, because I think she's been a little bit hit and miss, not only because of her, because of her writing, but I genuinely prefer her as Black Siren quite considerably, to more than I ever did as Black Canary. Is that weird? I don't know. I always thought she was a really entertaining presence as a villain. Like, she's hamming it up, no question, but she seems to be having fun with it. So yeah.
I mean, you know me. I'm very much a Katie Cassidy apologist.
Yeah, I know.
So I generally liked her throughout the entire run, even way back in season 1, where most people seem to hate her. I was quite a fan. But she's very much playing a different character that is still somehow Laurel in the way, and I think that's done really well. Like, she doesn't feel like Laurel Lance, but bad. She actually feels like a fleshed out character herself.
Yeah, that's part of it as well. Even though she's hamming it up, she does completely feel like her own independent character. Like, she's not shackled to her previous role in any way, which I think is not only a benefit of the writing. I thought her introduction and the way Black Siren is used is pretty cool. To finally bring in like the alternate, for people who don't remember as well, Black Siren is the Earth 2 version of Katie Cassidy, who is a villain who Prometheus basically takes in to essentially mess with Oliver Queen's mind. So after she had previously appeared as a Flash villain. Yes, yeah. So that's another one of those crossovers with Flash. So yeah, I just genuinely thought she was a really good idea for a character, and she was, well written. And I think Katie Cassidy was clearly having fun with the role.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool.
And it was nice that they're trying to apologize for their mistakes of season 4.
Well, yes,
in my opinion.
Yes, they do the similar thing with the new Black Canary as well. Yes. That was the other thing I mean to us, actually. If we're going to go back to that.
Yes,
I don't. Drake. Yeah, I don't remember. So Diana Drake was the original Black Canary's name in the comics, correct?
So we mentioned this briefly last episode. Diana Drake was the mother of Dinah Laurel Lance, who originally had the Black Canary mantle as part of the JSA.
That's right.
And then passed it on to Laurel, who then took it on as part of the Justice League. So yeah, but aside from that, the similarities between Dinah Drake, the TV show character, and Dinah Drake, the comic character, that's really its name only.
Oh, okay, sure. It's basically, it's kind of to signal to the fans that this is the new Black Canary, because it has the same name as a Black Canary in the comics.
Yes, basically.
Sure, that makes sense.
And the natural canary cry, which is what Dinah Drake had. Although hers had to do with a metagene kind of thing.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah. Where the new one is because of the particle accelerator, isn't it?
Yes, they just tied it into the Flash.
Yeah, again. Sure. Once again, fits into the Flash. So, yeah. All right. Now that I've gotten all that out of the way, we can finally talk about Prometheus. And the reason I enjoy Prometheus so much, not only because he's a funny character, but also because he's kind of a stupid character in the comics in many ways. So Comic Prometheus is basically an anti-Batman. So he was the child
One of many anti-Batman.
Well, yes, true, but this one takes it like to the nth degree. Like, it's absurd how much they try to mirror him with Batman. And that he was a child of criminals. Think of like, the kid of Bonnie and Clyde or something like that. Who saw his parents getting gunned down by police officers when he was a child, which basically led to him dedicating his entire life to fighting not for justice, but against justice. Sound familiar? Maybe? Some people? Maybe to a certain character?
Oh, yeah, totally Spider-Man.
Yeah. So sure. Um, that being said, actually, Prometheus largely in the comics has almost always been a Justice League villain, which I guess kind of makes sense considering he hates everything justicey. So he would hate a group called Justice League. But I just figured he would have always. That's one of those weird things because I figured he would have made much more sense as a regularly occurring Batman villain in that way. But he more so sort of ties into kind of like, once again, an anti-Batman as being a Batman capable enough to take down the Justice League.
Yeah.
Like, there's been a couple of arcs in the comics when he's gotten into the Watchtower and he's, disabled all the different members through however means, similar to what Batman would do and things like that, and so on and so forth. In relation to Green Arrow, actually, in the comics, there's not an incredible connection. The closest thing I could find was there was a storyline, I think in the early 2000s, called Justice League Cry for Justice, in which Prometheus basically cuts off Roy Harper's arm. Yeah, which eventually leads to him blowing up a good chunk of Star City as well, I can remember, and culminates when Oliver Queen basically kills him for that. Yeah, sticks an arrow through his head. So, but as far as I'm aware, that was the first and I think last affiliation he's really had with Green Arrow.
You mean there weren't any more affiliations after he got an arrow in the head?
Well, yeah, good point. So, yeah, and then obviously he was dead from then on out. I think he's come back in regards to New 52.
Because comics.
Because comics, of course. But
that was sort of a nice reboot, so they haven't had much interaction since.
Exactly. So, yeah, that essentially means that the TV show just took the general synopsis of a Prometheus character as anti-Batman and then turned him into an anti-Green Arrow.
Yep.
So, unlike Oliver Queen, who is a man motivated by the death of his father, he is also motivated by the death of his father, just for complete opposite reasons. So basically takes, the core conceit of Prometheus and then just shifts it around to it being about Green Arrow instead. Like most of the villains in this show. Once again, stealing from Batman, but okay. He was even trained in a similar way to Batman through Talia and the League of Assassins, which is obviously talked about in the show. I'm trying to think about anything else regarding, like, obviously, it's a key point in season 5 that his father was killed by Oliver Queen because he was on the list in season 1, which once again, leads into the personal connection between the two of them. The one major difference between the two is motivation. Like, comic Prometheus despises just the concept of justice and anything affiliated with that justice. Whereas TV show Prometheus believes himself to be the embodiment of some twisted justice. Like, he believes everything he's putting Oliver Queen through is just and right, and he is doing basically what the law is not doing by, condemning Oliver Queen as a murderer and a criminal, which no one else seems to be doing. So not only, I think, is that a really good and smart change in motivation from the comics, in that just he hates justice and everything about justice is a very comic-y, straightforward, silly motivation. But this turns it into something not only tangible and something that's that makes him a little bit more sympathetic, but also ties in really well to Oliver Queen's arc in this season, which is largely about him reconciling with the fact that he is a murderer and that he has killed a lot of people in season 1 and subsequent seasons, which not only I think makes Prometheus a really good villain, but means he ties into the themes and arc of Oliver Queen in this season really well, which I think is really what the strength of this season is. So, do you have anything to add?
No, you seem to have covered so much. I do want to bring up Josh Segarra, who is the actor who plays Prometheus, who I think, technically plays Adrian Chase, the man behind the Prometheus mask, which is another interesting thing we should probably bring up. The fact that Prometheus in the comics is not Adrian Chase. Adrian Chase is a separate character who's also brought up in this show.
Yeah.
The Vigilante.
Called Vigilante. Yeah. So Prometheus in the comics, as far as I'm aware, his name is never revealed. So which basically means he could be called whatever else. So the decision to basically call Adrian Chase, who ends up being Prometheus in the show, is kind of, I think, a really clever switcheroo in many respects. Because the moment someone shows up called Adrian Chase, at the exact same time that the character called Vigilante, who in the comics is Adrian Chase, shows up on the show, immediately assumes that every fan of the comics watching the show is like, oh, it's just going to be Adrian Chase.
Yeah. And they even if you're not a fan of the comic, you still sort of get that impression with the whole Adrian Chase backstory as district attorney, trying to take out crime and trying to do his best both in law, but not being able to do everything that he can, and maybe he is going to vigilantism sort of thing. And
yeah, exactly.
So for all intents and purposes, Adrian Chase was a vigilante until he suddenly was Prometheus.
Surprise. Yeah, which I think is honestly a really cool thing. Yeah, we've talked about it before, but like kind of playing with fan expectations regarding certain characters and such, and I think this is just a really great example of it, and that it keeps people guessing. So, I mean, that being said, while I was watching the show, I did kind of guess eventually that he was Prometheus, because it wasn't necessarily the fact of like he has the same name of Vigilante in the comics and such, but it was just eliminating all those suspects. He would have made the most sense to be Prometheus, which, I mean, it's still just the process of watching the show, but I think it's just a really smart change, and it's something they could do considering Prometheus doesn't really have a name or any semblance of like beyond just the basic motivation in the comics that, can change it up. I think it works really well.
Yep.
And he's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely love him in his performance. Especially the one episode in which he is Oliver Queen locked up and is just torturing him.
Yeah. The pseudo bottle episode, kind of. It's just their like love-hate bromance going at it for the full episode. Yeah. It's
there was some
sorry.
There was a real intensity in his eyes behind it. But at the same time, every time he smiled, it's like I'm reassured, but at the same time creeped out.
Yeah, he's deranged, isn't he? Yeah, like I think this character and his performance, I think, really strikes a perfect balance between super hammy at times. Like he leans into the hypervillain thing time and time again and clearly enjoys doing it, while at the same time still having an air of menace and an air of drama and a level of unpredictability as well. Like you can kind of look at Adrian Chase at any point, especially in that episode as you're talking about, and kind of see that not only is he manic and somewhat deranged at the same time, but he's also like, as you mentioned, he has a real intensity and presence at that same time that is not undermined by his mania and by the fact that he is playing up the fact that he is a really hammy villain. So I think it's a difficult balancing act that he really pulls off, which I thought was really impressive.
And it really makes it believable in the whole idea that he's like this sort of planned everything out in his own twisted kind of way.
Yeah.
And always being that 10 steps ahead. You can actually believe that he could be ahead of Oliver in terms of unpredictability.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not the question, like, he's not inherently thinking like an irrational man, which is why he keeps doing all these really weird twisted things of, like, bringing in Black Siren or accidentally forcing him to kill other people and so on and so forth. So,
killing Artemis in front of his eyes, but surprise, not really.
Surprise, yeah. So, just... really, really good villain. I genuinely think this is maybe even the one reason that this season succeeds as well as it does. So,
I'd absolutely put most of that behind the performance of Josh.
Yeah, if we had like another Ra's al Ghul or whatever else this season, I really feel like it just, especially considering the other faults, I feel like we wouldn't be talking about this season as favorably as we are at the moment. So. No, I think it really works. I mean, as annoyed as I am of just once again stealing everything from Batman, it does make sense. Yeah, it does make sense for Green Arrow, and they do a good job sort of adjusting it to this version of Oliver Queen in the show, and so on and so forth. So yeah, no, I think it's really good. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding season 5, or I feel like we've hit all the big stuff?
I do want to talk about the final 2 episodes.
Okay, sure.
And
back on
Lian Yu and bringing in everyone.
It's basically Arrow All-Stars.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have Green Arrow, Deathstroke, Merlin, Nyssa, Captain Boomerang.
Yeah, I was about to say, takes a weird turn when he shows up.
Yeah. Basically, Ruffinghouse against Team Prometheus of Prometheus, Artemis, Black Siren, and Talia al Ghul. And holy crap! Was that an intense episode? Yeah,
it's fun. This is one of those episodes that I kind of feel like this could almost be a series finale in many ways. Not only the fact that it returns to Lian Yu, it's the end of the 5-season arc as you're kind of talking about, but it almost has that like level of maybe not like comic booky finality of where every character comes back for like a final hurrah of fisticuffs and so on and so forth. It really feels like one of those big like splash page events that you would finish off a comic run with if you can. So yeah, and I think it's really fun. I mean, obviously, like, it's still very silly in many ways, and Arrow, even though it started off gritty and such, progressively gets kind of more hammy and, operatic as it goes along. And this is the epitome of that, but that doesn't make it any less entertaining, I thought. So.
I thought it was a really interesting dynamic where you have, like, especially when Prometheus and Green Arrow and William, Oliver Queen's son, are on the boat, and you're cutting everything between, like, the very comic-y, very forest. Oh, this place is rigged with
Everyone is in
explosives.
costumes, just punching each other.
Yeah. To then just, oh, this is an actual battle of ideals and very intense stare downs.
Yeah.
And then that final shot of Prometheus shooting himself in the head
Yep.
and blowing up the island.
Literally blowing up an island somehow. I don't know how that works, but sure. Why not? They might have even just chucked in a mushroom cloud or something, to be honest. But yeah, which obviously is the most appropriate and incredibly frustrating cliffhanger leading into season 6, which makes it even more frustrating that the payoff in season 6 is nothing.
One death.
Yeah, almost nothing. Okay, at this point we're basically finished with season 5.
Yeah.
Do we just want to start moving into season 6?
Yes. So season 6 is basically Oliver Queen trying to deal with, I guess, the fallout of Prometheus.
Fallout.
Yes, that is the first episode.
Yes.
Dealing with the fallout of Prometheus and trying to deal with his new Team Arrow and basically the accidental villains they've created against them in the term of the weird super villain of Caden James.
Yeah.
And his helpers, Ricardo Diaz, Black Siren, the Vigilante.
Which doesn't make any sense.
No. And the other guy.
The other guy.
Yes. I think he was just like an elite henchman.
Oh,
he was in there for a bit.
Yeah, sure.
I can't remember his name. He was not memorable.
That's fair.
Not really based on anyone from the comics.
The show probably forgot about him too, to be honest.
They killed him off.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so season 6, obviously continuing on from season 5. Yeah, that's fairly solid summary of the season. I will preface this outright. This is actually the first season of Arrow that I have not seen all of it of. This, funnily enough, so actually watching this to begin with, so I'd watched Arrow sequentially from like season 1 until up to this point, and I got like maybe, I don't remember how many episodes, but it was like a handful of episodes into season 6, and then that was the point where I finally stopped. It was mostly just the coma and the complete lack of payoff after the climax of season 5 and everything that just found really frustrating. It was at the point when I was trying to keep up with all the other CW shows, so I was watching Flash and Legends of the Tomorrow as well, and it just became too much. And this was just finally the point where I just pulled the plug. I'm like, I'm going to move on at this point. So as much as I enjoyed elements of season 5, I was kind of beginning to wane on it at that point. And season 6, just the beginning of season 6, just kind of hit the nail on the head in that respect. Obviously, I've gone on since then and seen later snippets of the season to do this episode, as well as further research and things like that. Although, I don't know if I can necessarily speak to the full quality of the season, because I don't think that's fair without watching it all properly. I found it very much diminishing returns, at least in my experience.
I can completely understand where you're going by that. And as someone who has watched the entirety of season 6 because he's a masochist, I can basically say, you can sort of split season 6 up into 2 completely separate seasons. In 6A and 6B. Okay. Because those who don't know, who for some reason are still listening to this show despite the fact not watching it, I mean, go ahead, sure, why not?
Yeah, why not?
I do that all the time. But Caden James, the so-called villain and big bad of season 6, is killed by the mid-season finale.
Surprise.
And he's taken over by Ricardo Diaz, also known as the Dragon, who becomes the big bad for the rest of the season. And that is basically all you need to know in terms of the villains, because they are very lackluster.
Yeah, it sounds about right. See, this is one of the funny things. Even though I wasn't watching Arrow at the time, I was still subscribed to r/Arrow. So much of my perception of the season while it was going on is through memes, basically. And almost all of those memes were just mocking the villains, especially Ricardo Diaz.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's not a good sign, I think.
Like Wild Dog, he did go on to be improved a bit in season 7, but not a lot.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, for season 6, he doesn't live up to the hype. Essentially, what he could have been. The potential. We go back to the whole problem that I had with season 3 and season 5 of story potential and Chekhov's gun, in which none of everything that they set up with possibility for the end of season 5 went nowhere. And yeah, so that's probably my way from it. Did have its cool, interesting moments. You did have the weird little Team Arrow civil war that was brought up in the middle there, which didn't make a whole lot of sense, but was kind of cool just to watch everyone fight each other.
Sure.
That was like the only good thing about that subplot. And watching new Team Arrow sort of dub themselves the Outsiders and do things their own way, I thought was quite interesting because finally we had some proper development for Mr. Terrific, Wild Dog, and Black Canary.
Yeah, which is nice.
And yeah, I'd actually go on the record and say I'd be okay if we just sort of spun them off into their own little thing.
Really?
Sort of kept them...
Their own series? Or
Maybe not their own full series, but
right, okay.
even like inside of Arrow, if we just had a few episodes where it was just following Team Arrow and...
Kind of like how they do a Diggle-centric episode every now and then.
Yes.
Like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Have like an outsider-centric subplot where they take up the main plot and Oliver Queen sort of steps behind the curtain for a bit.
Sure, fair enough. Interesting.
Yeah, it's very mixed feeling. I'd link this a lot to season 3.
Okay.
Where there was some great moments, but not great storytelling.
What half of the season would you say is better? Like 6A and 6B?
6B.
6B, oh, okay, right. So it does improve as it goes along.
Yes, it does.
To some extent.
It clears up a lot with the whole vigilante. It turns out, he was actually working as a mole on the inside, and then he dies.
For sure.
Which sends Black Canary in a fit of rage, because, surprise, the vigilante was actually her old partner.
Pew, pew, pew. Yeah.
But now that he's taken out and we sort of start moving into the redemption arc of Black Canary and start looking more into the actual backstory of Ricardo Diaz, although his motivations aren't great, at least they're there. With Caden James, he was sort of... The motivation for him taking out Green Arrow was Green Arrow killed his son, but then, oh, no, it wasn't Green Arrow, and then I'm still holding the city hostage.
Yeah. Still mad. I'm still just an evil hacker, basically.
Essentially.
Yeah, so, that sounds fun. Honestly, you're just making me somewhat glad that I dropped off when I did, to be honest.
Yeah, no, you really did not miss a whole lot. The only reason I'd say to watch season 6 is so you can watch season 7.
Well, sure. Yep. Which we will get to eventually.
Yes.
Yep. Once, obviously, at this point, we don't know when exactly this episode will be coming out, but season 8 is confirmed as the last season and was only going to be consisting of 10 episodes, which absolutely means we'll be doing a final part of this quad trilogy per se when we talk about season 7 and 8, in which I will almost certainly watch. Because I really, obviously, like, even if I dropped off at season 6, this is still a show that I've stuck with for a long time. And I always feel like you need to see the end.
You need finality.
Yeah, exactly. You need finality. So that'd just be the way to go. Yeah.
So do you want to start talking about some of the characters?
Yeah, sure. Hit me with your best shot. We can start with the Outsiders, actually. So
so
that's something I can speak to.
Yeah, well, the Outsiders are an actual group in the...
Guess who they're affiliated with? You want to take a guess?
They're a Batman group.
I know. And how weird. Green Arrow stealing from Batman? That's so strange. He's never done that before, surely.
I'd just like to certify, they're called the Outsiders for 1 or 2 episodes.
Yes, but it's a very intentional name. Yeah, I know.
And they blow it off pretty quickly.
Yeah, fair enough.
And aside from that name, again, not a whole lot in common.
I mean,
with
they have no characters in common with the Outsiders, as far as I can tell. Like the original Outsiders crew, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But yeah, so that little group is Wild Dog, Mr. Terrific, New Black Canary that we talked about. I think they did a decent enough job. They were saddled with a lot of bad writing, especially when they kept sort of... The writers, I think, felt the audience would keep forgetting the previous stuff of episodes, so it kept coming back. And you probably saw this on Arrow at the time.
Yeah.
They basically could be summed up with 3 lines.
That doesn't change anything. Oh, this doesn't change anything, Hoss?
Justice for Vince.
Oh, that's right.
And I'm gay.
Oh, God.
Which is really unfortunate as a LGBTQI person myself.
Yeah.
Watching the gay character be relegated to being the gay character.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that even before that, even in the crappier rating of season 4, he was so much more than that.
Yep.
And could do so much more that it just felt...
It was a side note of his character rather than being all of his character. Yep.
Yeah.
He was not just the gay. He was Curtis, who was also the gay.
Yes.
Yeah, so... Yeah. Though I remember a lot of different memes about that. Normally all heavily affiliated together, and this doesn't change anything. Hoss was commented everywhere. I even saw that in other subreddits from time to time when Arrow would just randomly invade other subs.
So yes, their character development I use that term loosely, was very much roundabout of just going through the same motions again and going nowhere. But the performances I still feel are great in season 6 compared to season 5.
Right.
I think there was an improvement on everyone's part. They actually worked out who their characters were.
Which is...
Even if it was because they were repeating it again and again and again.
Sure. They got there at the end eventually.
Yes.
It's like the how does that pronounce? Mimetic? Like, the the memory tricks that people use to repeat something to remember it. Mnemonic, I think it is. Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but it's just that in character form.
Yes, essentially.
Which I find very funny. Yeah, which basically means, as you sort of touched on before, it doesn't really have much to do with the Outsiders in the comics. The comics version of the Outsiders was always affiliated with like a group of outcasts that Batman basically put together to kind of work as not necessarily a Black Ops squad, but like a tangentially related group that he supports in many ways. In the comics, I think the original team was Black Lightning, Metamorpho, and Katana.
There were a few other characters.
Obviously more contributed down the line, but I'm trying to remember what the original few were. There has been different versions of the Outsiders in different TV shows as well. Like there's a version of the Outsiders in Brave and the Bold. There's one in Young Justice as well. But it's almost always been affiliated with, this is kind of a group of like struggling teens that Batman is supporting and giving some sort of purpose to. So obviously there is a similarity in the fact that they splintered off from Green Arrow, who is the proto-Batman in this case, but that's kind of where the similarities end. Because almost in the Outsiders in the comics in many ways is almost a support group in some way. Like characters like Metamorpho and Black Lightning that are struggling with their own like interpersonal issues and then find support in each other. Where that doesn't really happen as much. There isn't as much of a focus on that, at least with the ones in this show, because they're not like teenagers or anything like that. And none of them are horrible. How do you describe Metamorpho? As like a horrible mismatch of different elements. Like basically an evil clay golem. That's what he looks like at the very least. But he's like a small, timid child inside of that. So, yeah.
It's like if Clayface was a good guy.
Yeah,
and had more than clay in him.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So, yeah, if people know Clayface anyway. So, once again, it's kind of one of those lip service, take things from the comics. People are going to recognize it. That's kind of it. So, is there anything else you want to touch on regarding any of the other characters? Or before I get into the villains? Or, whatever the villains have actually to provide, which isn't a lot this season.
Well, we should probably touch on Green Arrow.
Well, yeah, sure. Oh, yes, of course. You're going to talk about... Yeah, no, fair enough. All right.
So, Green Arrow.
Uh-huh.
It's such a hard thing to sort of go into because there is so much history. There is so much canon and recanon and reboot and so much has been done with him over the years. He has a history that we mentioned in previous episodes all the way back to the 1930s. It's hard when you're trying to adapt a character like this, I can imagine, and try and keep things right. I do want to say my biggest thing is essentially Arrow. The Green Arrow in Arrow is still not the closest that we've come. It's not the closest that we've had to original Green Arrow in the comics. Weirdly, though, Stephen Amell is the closest that we've gotten to Green Arrow in the comics.
Real life Stephen
Amell.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but seriously, he is what you need what I think you need in a good Green Arrow is he needs to be physically fit, but not overly intimidating. He needs to have a good, solid moral compass and social justice with a very lefty socialism skew to it. He needs to have a solid family, whether that's his own family or the family of heroes that he congregates around him. And he needs basically to be fun. And Arrow never seems to have all four of these at the same time in the TV show. Stephen Amell, though, has all four. He is incredibly funny, especially if you follow him at conventions and things. He's very lively. Very into it. He has his whole little family, which you go through, and all his little friendships and stuff with other actors. His cousin is literally Firestorm in The Flash. So you have that. He is incredibly physically fit.
Oh, yeah.
If you have... I'm a wrestling fan, and I've watched all 3 of his matches, he does some impressive stuff in the ring.
I didn't even know he was in wrestling. Yeah.
No,
okay.
well, it was brought on just as sort of a...
Special event kind of thing.
Originally, with the WWE, he did a whole thing with Cody Rhodes, who appears in season 6
There you go.
as Samson.
Synergy.
Yes. So it was this whole thing where Stephen Amell got into a fight with Stardust, who was Cody Rhodes' character at the time, and also referenced as the drug that they're making in the show.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of links to this. And through that sort of work and his match at SummerSlam, he and Cody basically struck up a friendship. And the two kept like appearing one another at conventions and stuff. Eventually, he was included as one of the few non-wrestlers in the Bullet Club, which was the big sort of faction going on at the time in wrestling, to eventually getting a one-on-one match against Christopher Daniels at a huge pay-per-view called All In. And where everyone thought he'd do pretty crumbly, he held his own and he did some amazing stuff. There's one match, his second one, he gets put through a table.
Oh, fun.
Off the apron. So like
That does feel like something that would happen to Green Arrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to see more of the physicality of Stephen Amell, I highly recommend watching those 3 matches that he's in. Because he is incredibly physically impressive.
Sure.
And he's also got the social justice sort of lean with that Green Arrow needs in his whole multiple charity campaigns that he runs and all this stuff give back to the community. He is protesting. He's basically Green Arrow. And that is unfortunately why I think the show kind of misses, because it never gets all 4 at the same time.
Right, okay.
Oh, and also Stephen Amell grew goatee.
True. He's been, he's been succumbing, he's been promising the goatee for how many seasons at this point, hasn't he?
Yes, every time. And he grows it out and then gets told to shave it.
Yeah, that's going to be season 8, right? That's how they're going to finish. He's going to grow the goatee.
I hope so.
It's going to be the way Smallville ended. When he finally flies off of Superman, he's standing in front of the mirror and the goatee just magically grows onto his chin. That's it. That'll be the last shot of the season. The series, I should say. I even think about the reason he's come out as to why Arrow was ending was basically because Stephen Amell wanted to be with his family more. Yeah, and that Arrow shoots in Vancouver.
It's a very Green Arrow thing.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It made me think of some of the conflicts he's had with Black Canary and sort of the dealing with the family life of wanting to have a kid at the same time as being a vigilante. I just think that was a really interesting parallel, and I've never thought about it in that respect too. The way that the actor in many ways embodies the character more than the writing does, which is a weird dichotomy to have. And I can't think of any other examples in that case. You can think of other big stars like Robert Downey Jr., praise be unto him, is very much his arc in real life mirrors Iron Man's in the film in many respects as well. But Stephen Amell, I've never considered that before, but almost takes it to another level in that he in real life is in more ways Green Arrow than the show Green Arrow.
And I think that's why it's always disappointed me and why I could never fully accept Arrow as being Green Arrow when there was right there in my face the potential to be the best Green Arrow that we've seen and not get used.
Yeah, and it's all happening on Facebook instead of the television. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah, that basically sums up my opinion on Arrow in this. I do think the character of Arrow and the character of Volqueen in this universe, while a little up and down with the writing, like we've mentioned, is good. It's not what I was expecting.
Right, okay. Yep. And one thing we have to keep in mind is as well that obviously Stephen Amell is shackled to the writing and production and so on and so forth. So it's not like he isn't someone who can shepherd the character in a way that other people have in the past. No. So I do know a lot of really big name actors who are really personally connected to the characters they play. First example that comes to my head is Harrison Ford loves Indiana Jones. Obviously he's been pushing for that next Indiana Jones film for a good while, which we'll be getting in a couple of years.
And a more modern example being Ryan Reynolds in Deadpool.
Yeah, exactly. So that is a perfect mirroring of character and actor while also, supporting each other in many ways. Deadpool and all the success of Deadpool would not have happened without Ryan Reynolds and that test footage being leaked, which, as far as we know, may have also been Ryan Reynolds. We don't know for sure. But that's a really interesting perspective. And it does make me kind of disappointed in that I've never disliked the Oliver Queen on the show in many ways, and I obviously do not have the personal connection that you have to the Green Arrow of the comics, but it does feel a little bit weird that they're always only going to be taking fragments per se, but the whole of the character in its entirety has never fully been complete. That's maybe one thing we get in season 8. Hey, you never know. At the time of this recording, season 8 is obviously not out, but
hell, season 7 is still going. So.
Well, yes, exactly. So it's an interesting thing to think about. So, is there anything else you want to talk about regarding the other characters in season 6, or?
No, not a whole. We've touched on everyone else that's been in this show. So at this point, they haven't introduced a whole lot of new people except the villains.
Segue. Not that there's a whole lot to talk about regarding the villains at this point. No. Unfortunately, compared to Prometheus and such. Just to sort of talk about it briefly. So the main antagonist of the first half of the season, you sort of mentioned, is Caden James, but also the organization that he is leading, which is called Helix. Helix has actually been many things across the DC universe across the years. There's a group of 6 mutated kids. There's a Helix Commission, which is basically a eugenics group, which is actually affiliated with the Langstroms, which is Man-Bat, which is once again one of Batman's antagonists, and so on and so forth. But as far as I can tell, the kind of hacktivist, anti-vigilante Helix group that exists in the show is kind of a generally original creation, from what I can tell. Same thing with Caden James too. I could not find any sort of reference to anyone called Caden James in the comics.
No, he is an entirely new character for this show.
Which I think kind of epitomizes the same approach they take to Helix. It's kind of one of the things, it's even similar to how we were talking about with Mr. Terrific before, that they've sort of shifted the focus to a more technology-based side with the bringing in more of Felicity and so on and so forth. And Helix is just kind of the main antagonist embodiment of that. Because when was Helix initially introduced? It was season 3 or season 4?
No, I'm pretty sure it was season 5.
Was it season 5? Oh, okay. I don't remember.
And then died a very subtle and
anticlimactic
death
halfway through season 6.
No, earlier than that.
Oh, what? I assumed it'd be when Caden James dies.
No, it might have still been around.
Oh, okay.
But by that point, Caden James was basically just a villain on his own.
Oh, okay.
With no real ties to Helix. And then they turned Helix into the name of Felicity and Curtis's Kickstarter.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Which is weird and kind of twisted in a way.
Yeah.
Taking the name of a group that has really not been that great to them for the last couple of years. But hey, okay, Arrow writers, you do you.
Yeah.
So moving on from that, if we're going to talk about who is essentially the main antagonist for the season, which is Ricardo Diaz, aka the Dragon, aka Richard Dragon, which is actually a character from the comics.
Yes.
Though this is an interesting one, because at least in my experience, this version, you could probably speak to this more, but this version from the show has a lot more in common than the new 52 version than it does with the original Richard Dragon in the comics.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so, I'm trying to remember, I think the original Richard Dragon came about maybe in the 70s or 80s or something like that.
Yeah, around that time. And basically was kind of a good guy.
Yeah, in some respects. He was maybe close to an anti-hero in some ways, but he's kind of like a comparable almost Iron Fist in some ways, and then he's just, heralded as a super great martial artist and goes around punching people and things like that.
And acts more as a mentor for a lot of the other major characters rather than him being the focus himself.
Yeah, sure. But then in New 52, they kind of reintroduced the character as Richard Dragon, who goes by the name Ricardo Diaz, which is where that comes from as well. In which he's kind of affiliated with a drug lord in some way. I don't remember the exact specifics with the character, but he's essentially in New 52. He's a talented martial artist, much like the original character, but is instead connected to a drug kingpin who was previously killed by the John Diggle of New 52, which is a new connection because obviously John Diggle, as we mentioned before, wasn't introduced until after the show started. So as far as I can tell with the adaptation to the show, it takes the broad strokes of the fact that he's a martial artist and he's a drug kingpin, and then that's kind of it, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, essentially. And also the dragon tattoo.
Well, yeah, sure.
But that's more of an aesthetic thing.
Yep. The fact that he is still the dragon in many ways, but it really feels like, once again, it's kind of one of those, I'd kind of compare him to the Merlin in season 1, I guess, when there is a really basic outline of the character, which they took some elements from, but then took it in a very different and more personal direction towards Oliver
And
Queen,
they also
obviously.
grounded it a bit more.
Yeah, sure.
It's still very hyperinflated comic book world. He basically owns most of the police force at this point, but that's through like bribery, corruption, blackmail.
Sure.
And it very much ties in more with that sort of magnum opus of Green Arrow's villains, in which they are just the 1%, but also happen to have powers.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, it's interesting. I think in this version of the show, if we're going to talk broadly the changes, he is much more of a like drug kingpin per se than he is like ninja. Because as you sort of mentioned, it's more grounded. Like he's not doing the usual like jumping off walls and things like that he normally does in the comics, like that kind of thing. So
in the season 6B, he does get a bit more of a sort of martial arty type thing where he's like training up some of his new recruits.
Yeah, sure. I have seen some of that actually.
And have you seen the fight with Green Arrow?
I might
where
have
it's
seen.
literally Oliver Queen versus Ricardo Diaz in just a fist fight.
I might have seen snippets of it. I don't quite remember, but yeah.
Okay, well, there was that sort of fight, and then in the end, Ricardo Diaz gets a knife and cheats.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So,
Feels like-
no real honor, unlike the original comic book version, who at least had some honor.
Yeah, sure. Do you have much experience with the new 52 version of the character? He wasn't a major player from what I can recall.
No. And
He was never considered the main antagonist in a way that Season 6 plays him up to be, at least. So.
no, and in the Green Arrow mainline comic book series, he didn't really pop up until later on,
Okay.
when some of the audience started leaving.
Sure. Yeah, it
Anyway,
wasn't until
so-
2012 or 2013, wasn't it? New 52, from what I can remember? When Richard Dragon was reintroduced.
Yes,
Yeah,
into
so
the New 52.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
later into the run. Yeah, sure.
Yes. Especially coming around. I think it was around the changes of writing
Right.
stuff as well.
Yeah, okay. I
where we
mean,
go from there.
honestly, there's not too much more to say about
No.
him. So, yeah.
Aside from the fact that he's a loser.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's if there's one thing I learned from all the memes is that Ricardo Diaz is just real unfortunate soul. I almost felt sorry for him, to be honest. Not based on anything from the show. It's just purely because how many people make fun of him. So
Which is a shame, because it is actually... Again, one of the things that I love about the show a lot is the performances of the people they get for their villains. And
that does tend to be a general highlight, doesn't it? Thinking about it now. Yeah.
so yeah, and in this particular case, there's no real change. Kirk Avesedo,
Yeah.
I think is how we pronounce it.
Let's go with that.
I'm going to call him Kirk because I don't want to piss him off because
Say
he
it.
will break me.
Yep. Say it once and move on.
Yes. He does give a menacing performance that is not as great early on, but that's because it's very much of a held back role in the fact that he is basically just treated as one of the heavies of Caden James. But by the time end of season 6, start of season 7 comes around, I feel he's properly gotten into the role and can deliver quite the menacing monologue. And also looks
As all
like...
villain needs to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, looks like he can kick your ass 5 ways to Sunday.
Sure. So, yep. I mean, in generally conceptually speaking, the idea of a drug kingpin who is also like a master martial artist, if I'm being honest, is kind of generic. If I'm being real, like there was always a distinguishing factor with all of the other villains. Like you think with Merlin, he's like obviously the Dark Archer compared to Oliver Queen. Slade Wilson, obviously because he's Deathstroke in so many ways, as well as the personal connection. Ra's al Ghul, head of League of Assassins. Damien Dark Magic. Prometheus, so on and so forth. It doesn't seem to be anything significant about this character, which is once again one of the things I seem to get from all the memes making fun of him.
Well, a lot of it, like you keep mentioning him being a drug kingpin. The drugs actually don't really seem to stand up after 6B. He's still known as trying to be the crime lord, and he's dealing with all
I
that
guess
stuff.
I'm using drug kingpin as more just kind of just
Generic
the
villain.
head of all crime in Star
Yeah.
City, yada yada yada. Crime boss,
And
is
I
probably
think
a
it
better
stops. His one gimmick is just the fact that he has a lot of money.
term. Well, sure. He's the 1%, as you
He
say.
is also, because of the stuff that Caden James did in the season 6, where he bribed the city, and the city went, oh, not bribed, blackmailed the city, and the city went, yep, here, take money.
Here's all the money we have.
Yep.
Just don't do whatever you're gonna do if you don't take our money. Yeah,
Essentially that, yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
So, which weirdly lines up closer to how Green Arrow seems to operate in the comics, where he's dealing a lot with, like,
The 1%ers.
the 1% and corrupt police officers and people who have a very different view on what justice is. But because of that, he also doesn't seem like he can, compared to the other villains, that he can bring it
Yeah, sure.
one-on-one.
Like, you compare to a guy who has lived for 100 years old and is essentially immortal to a guy with some money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real downstep. Even Prometheus, who, had a deranged, he thought, he thought he was right in many respects and all that as well. I don't know. I just don't find anything particularly interesting about just on a pure conceptual level, the character itself. So,
Completely understand.
Yeah, so I think that kind of shows. So, yeah, anyway. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of season 6 at this point. Is there anything you want to sort of briefly summarize regarding the whole series of Arrow to cap off this trilogy and eventually quadrilogy?
Watch Legends of Tomorrow.
Oh, wow, okay.
Well, no, I love Arrow, even though it hurts me so. But
It's an abusive relationship.
the reason I say watch Legends of Tomorrow, one, it's a really good show.
Yeah, it's really
Two,
fun.
it has a lot of the best parts of Arrow.
And the CW
condensed.
verse in general.
Yes.
Yeah.
And CW, in the fact that you have Katie Lotz being fantastic, Brandon Routh being fantastic, Constantine getting a proper run other than just the few cameos that he has in Arrow, which were the one good thing about season 4.
That's true, yeah.
And just the fun that you expect from a Green Arrow, you get that in Legends. So
Legends of Tomorrow, if I were to sell it on someone, is kind of like an even campier version of Doctor Who with superheroes. That's
Absolutely.
probably the best way I can describe it, because it's essentially just a group of people traveling through time. I never thought we would end...
although not as skilled as Doctor Who.
Yes, well, true. I
Which
never...
probably makes things better.
and far more entertaining.
Yes.
I never thought we would end talking about 6 seasons of Arrow by saying, hey, watch this other show instead. I mean, I guess at this point, if you're listening to this, you probably have seen most of Arrow at this point. So if you're not watching Legends, yeah, get on that. That is, if there was any CW show I would jump back onto, it would be Legends, because I thoroughly enjoyed everything I've seen of them thus far. So
Which of course means they're probably going to get cancelled as well.
yeah, I mean, it has been the lowest rated for a good while. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Shame.
only a matter of time, but we'll see. But yeah, no, if I was to just generally summarize my thoughts of Arrow, obviously I don't have the personal connection, you do, but it was like a lightly entertaining, if very frequently up and down show, for quite a few years. I obviously harped on this quite a bit before, but there's obviously a lot of elements in the show that I never really cared for, like the soap opera stuff and all that. So if you don't care for that, I would even suggest kind of steering away, because it does become a big part of the show and an even bigger part as it continues to go on. But if you don't mind that too much, and if you like just sort of the general comic book crime procedural, slowly leading up between, to a big bad in the season finale kind of thing, you will probably enjoy this. I don't know why I'm recommending this, considering people have probably seen it at this point, but just generally speaking, if I were to introduce someone to Arrow, saying sure but cautious recommendation in many ways. So.
Watch the first 2 seasons, then tread carefully.
Yeah, that's a good way to go about it. If you're not sold by the end of season 2, then just
you're not going to be sold.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. Well,
yeah,
cool. Thank you to everyone who listened through this whole trilogy of the Arrow season 1 to 6. We will obviously somewhere significantly down the line have the final culmination of season 7 and season 8. So, what have you got to recommend for us this week, Ev?
After that long slug through of a session, I'm going to continue with my Green Arrow theme of pointing out really good graphic novels. And I'm going to say Green Arrow, The Archer's Quest.
I haven't heard of this one, actually.
It's sort of set around shortly after Kevin Smith's Quiver.
Okay.
That one that I mentioned in past episode.
Sure.
And it's basically Oliver trying to find out who this guy is that attended his funeral while he was dead, but now is back alive. And he's like, okay, everyone else is clearly like, this is a very family meeting. It's the people who knew my secret identity, and this one random guy who's there looking all shifty.
Okay.
And
like the old classic film noir thing of someone in dark sunglasses and a trench coat hiding underneath a tree watching a funeral from a distance, that
basically.
Yeah, sure, I know the trope well.
And him hunting that down, and it's revealed that it's got to do with his sort of contingency plan that Green Arrow set up with one of the sort of supervillains or anti-villain kind of thing he set up.
Okay.
Who he could sort of trust to get rid of a lot of the stuff that connected Green Arrow with Oliver Queen in terms of passing, to try and keep his family and his secrets safe.
Oh, okay.
But now he's back, he's trying to hunt all this stuff back down again. And he follows all these other quests. Like there's something hidden in the Flash Museum, so he has to deal with that. He sort of gets back together with Roy Harper as a duo, and it's sort of like him coming to terms with how Roy Harper is now. That is, since Green Arrow had died and Roy Harper's gone and done his own thing as Arsenal, sort of trying to deal with that, trying to work out, basically trying to get in his life back on track and deal with everything he lost in the period where he was dead.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Is it a spoiler to find out who the villain is then, that he's trusted? Anti-villain? Is it a significant character? Or
Not super significant.
Okay.
It's so much so that I can't actually remember off the top of my head. He's only briefly shown. It's just, he's more of a sort of plot device.
Oh, I see. Yeah, not a recurring character or something. He just sets up what's happening.
Sets up for this quest.
Okay, sure.
And they're basically hunting about 4 or 5 MacGuffins throughout that are all very significant to the Green Arrow mythos and Oliver Queen's life.
Yeah, great. What did you say it was called?
The Archer's Quest.
The Archer's Quest. Do you have it?
I do.
I may steal it from you at some point.
Go for it.
Excellent. All right, mine in contrast, so I'm just going to be recommending another weird puzzle movie that I've had to watch for my PhD. Big surprise. But this is actually an Australian-British film called Triangle. Have you heard of this movie before?
It seems to have followed me around. I still haven't seen it, but it keeps popping up in random places for me. So I really do feel I have to watch it.
That is so thematically appropriate considering the movie.
Really?
That's kind of. It's a great film, but it's difficult to explain what exactly is going on because obviously it involves a lot of spoilers and things like that. The only main actor in there that I recognized was Liam Hemsworth, I think in one of his earliest roles and stuff. But the best way to explain it is just a bunch of friends go out on a cruise, their boat capsizes, and they land. They basically come aboard this mysterious abandoned ocean liner, and suddenly there's this masked person going around killing them all. But only at the end of that, when all of them have been killed, except for the final girl, who subsequently kills the killer, and suddenly everyone arrives on the boat again. And it's basically a loop starting over and over and over. To tell any more actually spoils it, but I think it's not only a fantastic and incredibly intricately well-made film, but also kind of emotional in that the reasons and the suggestions of why this is happening is actually has a lot of pathos to it that I was not expecting at all. So it's just a genuine surprise, not only regarding like plotting, but regarding thematics too. So I think it's a great movie to go into knowing as little as possible about and just get taken along for the ride. So 100% recommend that. It's one of my favorite puzzle films that I've been watching so far. So
if I'm not mistaken, isn't Melissa George also in that one as well?
Possibly, but I'm not as familiar with her.
Okay, well, I've seen her in a few her works, especially if you've seen the TV series The Slap.
Oh.
And the Australian one.
I've seen the ads for The Slap. I've never actually watched it.
She's been in a few other great shows as well. Really quite a good dramatic actress, I do find.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the cast is ultimately quite good in this. So,
okay.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised by that. It was just not a lot of people that I'm particularly familiar with.
Fair enough.
And just largely a smaller film overall as well. But I really think that lends to it. And what they do within those restrictions, I think is legitimately impressive. So, yeah, it's great. Check it out. Triangle. Real good film.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. We can be found at mediumshift@gmail.com. Please feel free to rate us on whatever platform you use for podcasts. 5 stars would be preferable, but also love to be honest, so on and so forth. Feel free to email in whatever else, recommendations and such. Or
Constructive criticism.
Hey, if you want to do your own, do it differently for Arrow or so on, all the other CW shows. Totally
you want to become a vigilante and need our help in any way?
Yeah, of course. We could provide tech support, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of us needs to get in a wheelchair first, obviously, and then go from there.
Shotgun nut.
Yeah, fine. Shotgun. Don't want to do shotgun. That'd be messy. Until next time, fare thee well. Oh, no, what are we doing next episode? We're doing, we considered, 3 episodes of going on a really long comic booky, really heightened TV series tangent. We're going to go back to our roots in some respect and just do film remake. So we're going to be doing a horror film called Let Me In. It is an American remake of I believe, Norwegian film called Let the Right One In about vampires. I've seen the original film. I'm very much looking forward to it. So until next time, fare thee well.
I didn't even get to do my annoying blurt.
I know. I was going to cut you out.
You robbed me of this one moment.
Fine. Do you want to redo it? Or?
Nope.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Fairly well.